Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Sakina, and today we're going to talk about everything regarding rapid prototyping with Flutter and Firebase. So, before we just get right into it, let me give you a quick introduction. So, my name is Sakina Abbas. I am the co-founder and CEO of ReacTree, along with being a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart. I initially started off as a native Android developer, but eventually transitioned into Flutter development, and which is what I'm doing currently. So I'm leading DevOps and Flutter at my company ReacTree. I'm also a core member of Flutter Karachi, Pakistan, as well as a Women in Tech speaker for Google Developer Space Singapore. So before we actually really start to talk about rapid prototyping, let me ask you what you really do. What's the first thing that you do when you come up with this great idea that you think is going to be literally a money-making machine for you? So, of course, you carry out your own research and everything to validate your idea. But what is the first thing that you do? You prototype it to test your concept. Now, when it comes to prototyping, there are multiple facets that you need to consider, which can really make your application a hit or a miss. So let's categorize it in terms of what the users might expect from your end product and what you as an owner want from your end product. So obviously your users care about the overall user experience, the user interface of it. It should work seamlessly. It should work flawlessly, smoothly. The features that you're providing as part of your prototype or application are obviously of key importance. And then there's security, there's scalable, like if you actually end up creating a full-fledged product out of this prototype, then at some point in time, you have to look at the scalability of it as well. So if you're getting a lot of users, you want your system to scale with it, right? But the most important of it is timing. You don't want to be too late into the market. I mean, you have just conceived your idea, you're really excited about it, and you want a very quick way to validate your idea with your test audience, perhaps, or with a couple of people very close to you, so that you can progress forward, right? Now, as an owner, what do you want from this prototype? There are obviously multiple metrics that you want to monitor, like how well your application is performing, which screen or which page the user is interacting with the most, and so on and so forth. But again, the most important aspect, even for you as an owner, is timing. You don't want to be late to the market. So this is where Flutter and Firebase come in. Flutter and Firebase, when you use them together in order to prototype your products, it's a really smooth experience. It's a really fast experience. And how is it so? Let's look into it. So what actually is Flutter? Flutter is an open source SDK developed by Google, and it is used to build cross-platform applications. So you essentially write just a single code base. And from that single code base, you're able to get applications for multiple platforms, not just specific to mobile, but also others. So we're looking at Android, we're looking at iOS, Windows, macOS, Linux, Fuchsia, web, and so on and so forth. And now we're even moving in towards embedded systems for vehicles, right? So the programming language that you use in order to create an application in Flutter is Dart. And it's been about 4 years now since Flutter has come in, and recently Flutter has really picked up on its popularity because it is literally one framework to rule them all. If you were to just Google about Flutter, these are some of the first few links that might populate your search results. And some of the keywords or key phrases that might catch your attention are build native interfaces in minutes, or build really beautiful native apps in record time. Now, as someone who's not really familiar with Flutter, someone who has just heard about Flutter and they're just starting with it, maybe you're someone who's coming from a native background, you've been coding in native Android or native iOS. For someone like you or for someone like that person, you might think that this is a hoax. I mean, this is clickbait. How's that even possible that you can create such beautiful native interfaces and that too in minutes? I mean, that's purely clickbait, right? But as you start to code along, as you start to learn about Flutter and just coding it up yourself, you will notice that it was actually not clickbait, and it's pretty much the real thing. So on the screen, I have a couple of applications shared, the ones that I made. So the first one is a music application that I coded as part of a live session sometime last year. So it's not just the UI, the functionality was also integrated. Okay, so you could play play from a file, you could pause it, you could stop it, you could seek from it by dragging on the seek bar and so on and so forth, right? And how long did it take me to code this entire thing? Obviously, because sessions are usually 40 minutes long, it literally took me 40 minutes to code this first application, which you can see on the very left. Then the one in the center is a game that I coded just the night before that I had a session. And this took me about 1.5 to 2 hours to code this entire thing with all of the collision detections, points, and everything. Okay, so yeah, that's how fast it took me. And then the last one that you see is a chatbot that I built using Flutter and Dialogflow. And again, this was part of some live coding session. And this took me 20 minutes, right? So the essence of sharing these applications with you guys is that whatever idea that you have, whether it's for a product, whether it's for a game that you want to develop, you can do that very easily and very quickly with Flutter. And how can you do that with Flutter? Let's look into it. So, the first thing that you might hear about Flutter when you're just watching a tech talk or something, it's that Flutter is a UI toolkit, okay? I would disagree. I mean, it's not just specifically for designing the UI, although the UI part is really, I mean, it is something about Flutter that's really speedy, okay? So Flutter comes with a lot of pre-built widgets. If we just talk about a button, then we have multiple different types of buttons. We have text buttons, we have elevated buttons, and so on and so forth. And obviously, with Flutter 2.0, we have even more types of buttons with even more flexibility to the developer. So if we just look at this button over here, you can style it however you want to. You want to provide it a gradient, you can do that with barely 2 to 3 lines of code. You want to give it a very nice shape. Maybe it's rounded on 3 corners, but not so rounded on the 4th corner. I know, bad UX, but I'm just saying, right? You can do that very easily using, again, 1 to 2 lines of code. So the bottom line is that there are a lot of pre-built widgets that you essentially consume the way that you might call a constructor for any object, and you pass it your own choice of attributes with your own choice of configuration so that you can get the desired outcome, okay? So they're very flexible, they're very customizable, and obviously there are some things, there are some widgets that you want to use in your application, but Flutter does not have, like, it doesn't have that primitive support for that, right? So what can you do over here? You can obviously create your own widgets, or you could head over to pub.dev, where there are so many plugins which are so creative and so beautiful, and you can just look at their documentation and just plug and play in your application. It's as simple as that. So this is one thing that's really speedy. And if I were to compare this or with creating widgets, which is, just by the way, a widget is nothing but a UI element. So a text is a widget, a button is a widget, and so on and so forth. If I were to compare this with native Android, let's say, and I'm talking about the days where we would code in XML and Java. I'm not talking about Jetpack Compose right now or Kotlin right now. So what you had to do was that just to create a normal button, you had to create a separate XML file for its style. You had to create a separate file for the layout, and then you would actually be coding in the Java file where you would reference all of those UI elements there. So it would get really complicated just for a very small, simple task. In Flutter, it's all inline. It's all a simple widget tree, a widget hierarchy, and it's just very simple to code. The other thing that's really good about Flutter is that if, let's say, you have created an application with a lot of screens, and obviously each screen has really large widget trees, obviously, because there are lots of UI components structured, right? And you're just using your application, and you come across this specific part of your application that you want to inspect because you're not happy with the padding, maybe you're not happy with the styling, or perhaps there's a button against which you have coded some functionality, but you can't find that functionality in your project because it's gotten too huge. So the way that Flutter makes it easy is Flutter Inspector. So in your dev tools, there's this option to inspect your widgets. And when you enable that, you can just click on your emulator or on your device that specific widget that you would like to inspect, either for its UI elements or for the functionality that you've associated with it. You just click on it, and your ID will redirect you to the exact spot where that widget is called and where that widget is basically configured. So you don't have to browse through files and directories just looking like, oh, okay, where is it? And you don't have to hit up Control F and yada yada, right? Now, you might have a question that, hey, so Flutter is a technology which supports cross-platform application development, right? So the way that it works is that whatever code that you write in Flutter, it's compiled into the native code, and that's how you get the platform-specific binary or executable, right? So for this, you might have a question like, hey, native platforms usually have native support for really, really important or complicated functionality, right? So for instance, if we're talking about a camera application, you would obviously need to interact with the native libraries of the device, right? So how is that possible in Flutter? Like, how do you manage that? So the way that you go about it with it is with platform channels. So platform channels is kind of like a layer that allows you to invoke native code from Flutter code. So let's say that you're someone who doesn't know much about native programming. Like I know about native Android, but I don't know about native iOS, right? So if there's some functionality that for which I really need that deep native support, what I will do is I will just write chunks of native code in my iOS or Android or whatever platform that I'm developing for. And I will just invoke that using the platform channels in Flutter. So it's quite convenient even for someone who's not familiar with native coding, and they can still leverage platform channels and make use of those features that are heavily dependent on native support. And obviously, we have ID shortcuts, which make a Flutter development even faster. So let's talk about Firebase. Now, so you've learned Flutter, okay, and you've coded this really minimal yet aesthetically pleasing application, which is just really fun to use, okay? But obviously, your applications need to be connected with a backend source in order to operate perfectly well, right? This is where Firebase comes in. Firebase provides you this suite of tools and features that you can leverage in order to create your prototype without having to think too much about architecting your your back end or other services that you want to integrate, right? So at the moment that you open up Firebase on your system and you create your first project, on the left side you see these all of these multiple options appear on the left side. Okay, so just by the look of it, you can see that okay, so there are certain services that I can use during my development phase. There are certain services that I can utilize after I have released my application and I just want to monitor it for performance analytics or perhaps crashes. Then obviously there's this huge panel for analytics, which you can configure as per your own requirements, so that they're giving you the information that you need from the usage of your application that you've released. Okay. And then we have this huge panel for engagement. So we have, for instance, cloud messaging. So cloud messaging is basically notifications. If you want to interact or if you want to engage with your customers, you can use push notifications to give them constant reminders, so that they're constantly engaged with your product, right? Now, Firebase per se offers a lot of tools, a lot of services, but obviously we won't be looking into all of them. And as a product owner, as a startup owner, or as someone who just wants to create a minimal prototype just to validate their idea, you don't really have to use all of these services. Okay, so these are just some of those that you can use, and some of those that I have actually used, and they're not even that time consuming to use. Okay, so we have authentication, which allows you to sign up or log into your application. Then we have two types of databases. One is the Cloud Firestore, one is the Realtime database. Then we have storage. So let's say that the user or the customer is uploading media. So let's say if we take the example of WhatsApp, then when you're chatting with someone, you're obviously sending them images or GIFs or whatsoever, right? So this kind of media you can store in storage, and that's how, and then you can later on fetch it from storage and render it accordingly. Then there's cloud functions, which is again a really interesting concept, which I will be talking about later on. And then there's Crashlytics, cloud messaging, and everything, which we'll be briefly discussing later on right now. If we talk about authentication, so one of the things that I really absolutely love about Firebase is its authentication. It provides not just the vanilla email password authentication, but also Google login, Facebook login, Twitter, GitHub, anonymous, and even phone verification, right? And the best part is that if you are allowing your user to log in via Google, then, and let's say you want to collect their data, or you want to verify that the user is a legit user and not just some bot, then you can also pair their identity provider with a third-party identity provider. So let's say if I'm logged in via a Google account, I can still verify my phone number, and you as the developer can actually pair these two credentials together. Okay. And the way that you do this is literally it's done in about 2 lines of code and 1 line of code without any formatting of the code. Okay, so that's how simple it is. It's not that difficult at all. Now, when we talk about the databases, we have 2 types of databases, as I mentioned. So we have Cloud Firestore and the Realtime database. The way that they're both structured is that they're both NoSQL databases. So that means that you don't really have to worry about how you are structuring your database. And let's say if we're talking about the vanilla SQL database, then for that, we need to have a proper structure and proper schema and everything, right? In Firestore or in the Realtime database, if you're, let's say you're adding a record to a specific collection that doesn't exist yet, then it will create it for you. You don't have to worry about first creating that collection and then creating those attributes, creating that entire schema. No, it's just on the go. Okay, so that's really flexible. You don't really need dedicated backend engineers for this. If you have minimal knowledge of databases, of how you can structure your data, then it's quite convenient. So I won't be going into the very details of the two types of databases, but the key difference is that Firestore provides more flexibility in terms of querying, whereas real-time database is more suited for real-time applications. Okay, and why is this difference there? It's because of the way that the two are structured. So the real-time database, the data is stored in one large JSON tree. So there is one large JSON tree, and then this thing, it's just like pure JSON, right? But when we talk about Firestore, we have collections, and each collection has multiple documents. And then the document over here, as you can see, has fields. So if I were to translate all of this in normal SQL terminology, then the collection is nothing but a table, a document is nothing but a row, and the attributes are nothing but columns. Okay, so we can have multiple collections. So let's say we have a collection for users, we have a collection for posts, we have a collection for notifications, perhaps, we have yada yada yada. Okay, and if we're talking about a collection for users, then each document would correspond to one single user, where each document will have the user ID, the user name, the user email, and other attributes that you're willing to store. The real-time database, on the other hand, as you can see over here, it's purely JSON, which I'm pretty sure that all of you are aware of it. And again, just a reminder, it's better to use real-time database only when you are working on an application that's purely real-time, even though Cloud Firestore supports real-time as well. So you can, it's up to you, whatever is feasible for you, whatever works for you. It's just that the real-time database came in before, like it was there from the beginning, and then Cloud Firestore came in like a couple of years ago. So it came in after the real-time database, okay? Next up, we have the Firebase Cloud Messaging, which is push notifications. So these are, if you want to send real-time notifications to your users in order to engage with them, you can easily do that using FCM. So it really drives the user engagement and user retention. You can either send normal notifications, which are purely text-based, or you can even send your own payloads, which you can do so for up to 4 KB. And you can even send in images in your push notifications. So as you can see on this example that I have on the right, so Webtoon it's a very popular application which can be which are basically it's for web comics, right? So as you can see, this is an example of a push notification, and it has this nice image over here. So obviously there are certain constraints that the image should not exceed these much dimensions, obviously, which I think you can pretty much find on any documentation on the internet, but you can do all of that. And if you want to, let's say, if I'm clicking on this specific notification, what is my intended behavior? I want that when I'm clicking on this notification, the exact screen with this webcomic loaded is opening up. So I'm not being redirected to the home screen or anywhere else. I'm in fact being redirected to the screen where this webtoon is present, so that I can just start reading from there, right? You can do that. You can control notification clicks, and you can even monitor notification click events. So if you've dispatched a notification and you want to see how many people opened it, you can actually check that on the Firebase console. Cloud functions are functions that are triggered by an event. So they're serverless, right? They're not being executed on the client side or anywhere. They're being executed in the cloud. So let's suppose that we have two interfaces. We have a customer application and we have a vendor application. So let's say that a customer places an order for this specific vendor, and we want to notify the vendor that, hey, you have a new order on your application. Please open it and review it and accept it, right? So we'll create a cloud function for this. And the way that it's going to work is, so you can set multiple facets for which it can be triggered. Like, do you want this cloud notification to be triggered on, let's say, on the creation of a specific document? Perhaps you want it to be triggered on the update of a specific document. So let's say that the vendor has accepted your order, then the customer wants to be notified, right? So these are specific metrics that you can define, and these are just specific things that you can use together in order to code your own cloud function, right? So cloud function, again, it's not just specifically for triggering notifications. If you're working with a payment gateway, so let's say if you're working with Stripe, so for security purposes, you can actually create a REST API using cloud functions that you can use on the client side. Or if let's say that you're creating an order with a specific status and you want the order status to be updated only when the payment has been made successfully, then you can do so with cloud functions. So they're really powerful and just something definitely worth looking into. Then there's Crashlytics. So Crashlytics is something that if your application is crashing and you just want to monitor that, it's like you want to look at the logs for all of that, you can do so using Crashlytics on Firebase console. So a good example over here, I would tell you from my personal experience, which is, so when I was initially working with native Android, okay, that was the time when Flutter had not even come out. So the system that I was working on, all of the USB ports were fried, okay? And obviously fried USB ports meant that I couldn't connect the USB cable with my physical device and debug the issue. And the emulator did not, and basically it was, the application was of the nature that I could not test it on the emulator because it was something to do with real-time locations and real-time location updates, right? So the application was up and running. It was with our client, and the application was crashing for some reason, and I just didn't know what to do. And of course, I tried wireless debugging as well, but obviously for wireless debugging, you need to connect your device via the USB cable, at least for the first time that you're setting it up, right? So when all of these options had failed, I looked into Crashlytics, and lo and behold, it provided me a neat logs of all the crashes, along with along with very important information that I needed, such as the device that the person was using, the operating system version that the device had, and which screen were they on when the application crashed, which line of code was being executed when this application crashed. So it's something that's really useful and really comes in handy for when you've shipped your product, okay? Then kind of like the last thing, but definitely not the least, analytics. Once you have shipped your product, you want to monitor multiple aspects. So like, where are most of the users coming from? If it's a cross-platform application, are they coming from Android? Are they coming from iOS? Which regions are they coming from? Which screen or which button or which part of your application are they interacting with the most? And so on and so forth. You can do that easily with analytics. And guess what? You don't really have to do much. You just have to write a single line of code in your application, in your Flutter application. You just have to add that as a dependency, and that's it. Analytics will start working by default. Firebase already provides you some reports or some metrics for you to monitor, but obviously you can customize it as per your requirements, however you want to. Now, the bottom line is this that you might be asking, so is it too code intensive? And the good news is no. Everything that we've spoken about Flutter and Firebase right now, it's actually not really code intensive at all. It's pretty simple and it's pretty fast, and the learning curve is not even as steep. It's quite all simple. So what kind of applications can you build with Flutter and Firebase? Basically anything. The sky's your limit, from e-commerce applications to productivity apps to music players to games, chatbots, IoT, whatever, and whatever you imagine. Literally, the sky's the limit. You can pretty much build anything that you want with Flutter and Firebase. So after giving you this entire background on how Flutter works, on Firebase, on how Firebase works, how do you actually build your app with the two? So FlutterFire is the official umbrella library for Firebase for Flutter that you can look up on the internet. And the best part about FlutterFire is that everything is documented so properly that you don't really even have to navigate away from this documentation until and unless you run into some problems and you want to troubleshoot it, right? So from the process of integrating a specific dependency from the entire FlutterFire library towards integrating that code, towards defining multiple use cases for multiple platforms. It's quite friendly and it's quite easy to understand. So the way that it works in Flutter is that there's this file called pubspec.yaml where you include all of your dependencies. So dependencies are basically libraries that you would like to use in your Flutter application. So as you can see over here as a sample, we have a couple of dependencies added, such as Firebase Core, auth for authentication. Then we have Firestore, storage, messaging for push notifications and cloud messaging. Then we have analytics, the Facebook login, Google sign-in, and so on and so forth, right? So the bottom line is that why should you prototype using Flutter, or why should you prototype using Firebase? Again, they're both fairly simple and easy to learn and understand. They're very quick to implement. I will be showing you a working application along with its small chunks of code, not everything in depth, obviously, due to shortage of time, but just to give you a preview of like, hey, if we're coding something like of this nature, then how are we doing it, and so on and so forth. So it's quite relatively easy. They're both performant by default, and Firebase is scalable per se, until and unless you have coded your architecture or you have coded your database queries in a way that even Firebase is like, I'm so sorry, but I cannot scale beyond this point if you aren't following proper coding practices. They're both developer friendly, and Flutter is performant, it's highly customizable. And the best part about Firebase, I would say, is that it's quite powerful. So as we saw, there are a huge bunch of tools that Firebase comes with. So if your prototype is something that's perhaps it's something of an e-commerce store, or if it's something about a game, right? So obviously there are multiple facets involved to it, and you don't really need to involve people from multiple backgrounds in order to help you develop your prototype. Okay, so from messaging, from cloud functions to triggers to databases to storage, pretty much everything, you can do it on your own or with your small team that you have. You don't really need to interact with lots of resources, and you don't have to spend a lot of time planning on the overall architecture, on what services or which services are you going to use and from where, because Firebase is like a one-stop solution for literally everything. Okay, so I'm gonna just stop sharing my screen and then reshare my screen so that I can show you a working application along with a very minimal code. So just a sec. Okay, so as you can see over here, I have this application up and running. Let me just increase the font size. Okay, so as you can see, I have this application up and running over here. The essence of this application is that you can create a write-up and that write-up will be available and accessible anywhere and everywhere. Okay. I have implemented basic login mechanism for anonymous login. So let me just hit logout and show it to you from the very start. So as you can see, this is the application. And if I were to show you the UI for this specific file, now let's say, as you can see, I have multiple files over here, right? Won't be going into all of them. So let's use the widget inspector that we spoke of, right? So as you can see, I have Flutter Inspector over here. I click on widget inspector. And then let's say I want to look at this, like, hey, what is this continue as guest button? And as you can see, it redirected me to the exact specific spot where I have used this code. Now, as you can see, I have this over here on the right. This is actually my widget tree. So it's very easy to find the hierarchy of widgets if you're working with a really complicated application. So over here, let's see. I have material button over here. And as you can see on pressed, I have used anonymous authentication, right? So you can sign in anonymously. And then over here, I've used that once the user has signed in anonymously, then we are printing their user ID, and we're also checking if the authentication provider that was used is anonymous for this. And if it is, you should just print it, okay? So this is literally the only line of code that you need in order to authenticate your user anonymously. So it's kind of like a guest login. You know how certain applications provide you a guest login functionalities? This is basically it, just 3 lines of code, and the dependency is already there in pubspec.yaml. So let me just click on this again, and let me clear my logs so that you can see, okay? So I hit on continue as guest, and as you can see over here, it has printed my UID, and it has also printed true, like, hey, yeah, this indeed, the user has indeed logged in anonymously. Now over here, there are a couple of posts that you can see, obviously because I have created them before. But let me introduce a new post over here. So like, hey, Google I/O extended Kuala Lumpur. Hi, there is Flutter and Firebase rapid prototype. Okay, so let's hit submit. And as you can see, it's appearing over here right away. Let me just quickly show you the code for doing that. So as you can see, all right. So this is basically the code where we have where we're fetching all of our write-ups from the database. And as you can see, we're just referencing to our collection write-ups, and we're ordering them by date created. So the latest posts that are created are being shown first. And we're basically returning a stream of it. So there's this concept of futures and streams in Flutter and Firebase. Stream basically takes care of any real-time changes. So if I were to change the content of this from Firebase console right now, you will be able to see the changes being reflected here in real time. Future, however, it executes just once, and that's it, until and unless you exit that screen and then reopen that screen, okay? So if you've used Twitter, then you know that on Twitter, whenever somebody has posted a tweet, then when people are liking that tweet or when people are retweeting that tweet, then the count is increasing there and then right on your screen, okay? So that's being done using a stream, okay? That's where it's used. Now, because again, I don't remember where I have coded this entire thing. Let me show you where all of this is coming from. So as you can see, I have this stream builder in my home screen, which has a scaffold. Then we have this app bar that says pen pal. Then we have a floating action button, which is over here, and it's routing us to the new write-up screen, which had that form that we were filling in order to post it. And then in the body, we have a stream builder where we've just called our query. And then in the builder, we're just rendering a staggered grid view with each of the item containing the content which is coming from the database, right? So that's pretty much it. I know it was a very brief overview, but it was just something that I think would have been super useful for you if you want to prototype your idea in a very short time and by using as few resources as possible. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.
So he asked, question on Flutter and Firebase. For rapid prototyping, do you compromise on testing, or testing is a must? And how can I create Firebase mocks for unit and integration testing?
Okay, so I haven't really worked with testing in as much depth or in as much detail as of now. But yeah, if you definitely want to test your app after creating it, after developing everything, then you can definitely do multiple different types of testing in Flutter. You can do unit testing, you can do widget testing, and there are other multiple types of testing that you can do. So yeah, I think you can definitely look into that or into the documentation in order to get a deeper sense into how you can do that. The good thing about Flutter though is that you can write your tests there and then. And even if you're someone who's not from an SQA background, which is me, I'm not coming from a testing background, I'm more of a developer. But even when you're just a normal Flutter developer and you're just working with multiple Firebase services, you can easily test your application by writing different types of tests, which test your database calls, which test your widgets, which test the state management of your overall application. You can easily do that by writing your own custom tests, which again vary from requirement to requirement, like what do you even want to test. So you can actually do that very fairly easily by doing that. And the documentation by Flutter's official team is really spot on when it comes to testing. So yeah.